Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Creative Academy, your go-to source for accountability, coaching, and community for writers. I'm Crystal Stranaghan, and today we're chatting about series Bibles and editing tips with writer and editor Amanda Bidnall. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And it'd be great if you could just fill us in on a little bit more of your background, sort of how you came to be a writer and editor, and anything else you think people might want to know about your writing qualifications.
Okay, sure. I wasn't one of those kids who was writing fiction stories from the time I was 3. I definitely came at it from a different angle. I'm trained as a historian, so I got my PhD in modern British history and the British Empire in 2010. But not too long after that, I decided to start pursuing other realms of working with words. So doing other kinds of writing, freelance writing, editing, all sorts of editing. I still do research. I still do those sorts of things. I published a nonfiction academic book in 2017 called The West Indian Generation, which came out from Liverpool University Press. But I also write romantic fiction in my spare time. So I did write a draft of a historical fiction novel. So I do that when I can. I try to kind of fuse all the passions together if possible.
Nice. All right. Now, I have a little bit of insider knowledge about your editing experience because, full disclosure, Amanda is my editor. So as CJ Hunt, she's the one who takes all of the books and stories and helps me tweak them and polish them and make them reader ready. So some of the process we'll be talking about today is some of the process that we actually use together. And then also I know that you use different processes and have different focuses with other clients as well. So hoping we can absorb a wide variety of knowledge, and maybe just start off by talking a little bit about how editing a series is different than editing a standalone work.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's not too different. I mean, at base, it's sort of just like editing one full story that's a lot bigger. And you do still have to edit each installment in the series, obviously, as if it's its own story that can stand completely on its own. But I find that when I'm editing with the series, I'm much more aware of the wider world. I know that a secondary character in the story I'm editing may very well be a protagonist of another story, so I have to sort of keep my eye on those secondary characters as well, instead of always just focusing on the central conflict between the two protagonists. The other tricky thing about editing series is that there are gaps. There are time gaps between editing them. So it would be kind of like if I was editing one story and I edited chapter 1, and then I went away for 2 weeks and I came back and I edited chapter 2. Well, you're going to forget certain things. You can't do it all together and so sort of stay immersed in that world. So every time you come back, you have to revisit it, and you're revisiting it from a different perspective. So you got to kind of keep a track of all those threads.
Right. And so how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of it has to do with, I'm being really honest here, but it has to do with trusting the writer. I have to, on the one hand, I have to trust that the person writing the story has a handle on their world. I couldn't possibly check every single fact, that Lola is Sheena's sister and she does X in a previous story. I have to trust the author for a lot of those things. But I do have to get in my editing zone almost more than I would for a one-off story, because I have to stay just so attuned to any blank moment that I have where I go, wait, did they have green eyes in chapter 1? Did they have green eyes in the last book? And even if I'm 75% sure that maybe they did, I have to just be way more vigilant in those ways. And I do have to rely probably more on whatever tools that I have, editing tools I have at my disposal, and the writer has at their disposal. So a series Bible, or from an editorial perspective, a style sheet as well. I have to really revisit that style sheet every time, and make sure that I'm getting back into that world.
Right. So when we talk about a series Bible, that's something that I think a lot of people are not necessarily familiar with, but is a very helpful tool. And, for somebody who's looking at paying for ongoing editing services from book to book and wants to stick with a budget and make it as affordable as possible to get as good a product as possible, having a series Bible can actually help people save money, right? Because they are saving you time and having to go and hunt up these details as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is all about time. I mean, I can edit no problem without a series Bible, but I am going to be second guessing myself more. And when I do go back, I'm going to be searching. And sometimes a search isn't successful. I can do a search for green eyes, for example, but maybe in a previous book, you didn't describe them as green. You described them as emerald, or you just used other words. So unless I go back and I reread something, yeah, that's a lot of time. And it's also a time when I'm taken out of my editorial zone, and then I have to get back in again.
Yeah. So for anybody who's looking to actually create a series Bible to help both themselves keep track, because I'll be honest, I don't remember every last detail about every character that I've created. I remember very little actually from book to book because I get so into the current book. So I have to have some kind of cheat sheet to help me. So the series Bible is both for the author and for the editor. But what should be going into that? If somebody's looking at creating one for their own series or even their own book, what would you recommend be kind of the key elements or components that make up that document?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's going to be different. I mean, every series Bible is going to be different for every writer, depending on what kind of a story they're writing and what kind of a world they've created. But I would imagine that actually most people who write series have already, without even trying to, have already started some sort of series Bible, because you have to, if you want to get a handle on your world, you have to, for example, have a sense of timelines. Is your series going in chronological order? Are you going back in time? How much time is passing between every story? What are the timelines of major life events for every character? So timelines would be a really important element, I think, for almost any series Bible. Maps, I would say, would be an important element, whether it's a map of a small town called River's End in Crystal's world. It could even be a map of a house. Maybe there's, a house in this series that's really important, or a building or a place, and you want to have a map of that. It could be a map of a fantasy world that has regions and countries and has topographical elements. If someone's riding a horse and traveling from one side of that world to another, what does that look like? And when someone follows them, they have to make sure they follow that same path. So that sort of geographic understanding, I would say, is important. Character outlines. That's the first thing people probably think of when they think about consistency, because that's always, you have a secondary character and he's got blue eyes and blonde hair, and then by the time you're 10 chapters later, you can't remember what they look like. So physical characteristics, but also their personalities, also their interests, also things that have happened to them in previous books. So if they're a secondary character in book 1, and she's a teenager, let's say her name is Marianne, she's 17 years old, and in book 1, she's just the little sister of the protagonist, and she's arguing with her father because she wants to go to NYU and he wants her to stick closer to home. Well, when she becomes the protagonist of book 2 or 3, you have to remember what the content of that little conflict was in book 1. So those kinds of major plot, what's the word? Right. Yeah, those major plot events, those major plot milestones. That's what I meant. There you go. Another, I say, important thing for a series Bible is some kind of account of the existing relationships. So that could be a family tree, but it could be a friends and family tree. It could be a neighborhood tree. How do these people know each other? Do they work together at the same place? Are they in-laws? Whatever it is someone traveling in from out of town and visiting a friend? Have those kinds of connections. So yeah, I mean, anything that situates the reader in that world, that's the kind of stuff you want to have in the series Bible. And as I said, it's going to change, but from Bible to Bible.
Yeah, for sure. And so for those of us, I mean, a lot of people do collect all this information as they're putting together their stories in the first place. And I think the trick is collecting it in some way that would make sense to someone who's not you, if you were to share it, and having it in a format that is shareable. So, whether that's a Google Doc or an Excel spreadsheet, or if you use like Eon Timeline as a timelining tool, or maybe you use One Stop for Writers to track some of your timelining stuff, and you can export PDFs from there, which is super handy. And then you can share those directly with your editor. There's a ton of tools and a lot of really great things to help with that. So we won't probably cover every single tool in here because we're just having a shorter chat today, but in the how-to section that you have in your Creative Academy membership area, you will find tutorials on sort of examples of how to use those different tools and some templates that you can borrow as a starting place as well. So do check for those for sure. When you're getting a series Bible or reference materials from an author, how do you like those to be formatted or organized? Like, what's the easiest way for that information to come to you? Do you have any preferences in that area?
I wouldn't say I have any strong preferences as long as it's intelligible to me, but I mean, I just mentioned a handful of elements that would probably be in most series Bibles. Having those easily accessible. If you have one giant document that's 50 pages long and that's your series Bible, well, that is going to be another huge step for me to go through. But maybe say you're working in Scrivener, you've got your draft in Scrivener, but you also have your character outlines, or you have your family trees, or you have your images that inspire you about how the characters look, or what a certain place looks like. You have those organized anyway, and then I can just go and with one click. Same thing as if it's Google Docs. Google Docs, you have, earlier drafts of stories, or you have, drafts of earlier books. Everything's in one spot. It's just very easy to navigate. I mean, as we said, a lot of people do this anyway. And I think the key is just to do it consciously instead of just scribbling that family tree down on a piece of note paper that you stick up on a bulletin board. Just type it up, type it up and put it in Scrivener, or type it up and put it in Dropbox or anywhere. And so that other people can access it and read it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you think of any time where you've had somebody provide something like that kind of saved your bacon editing wise? Like any interesting near misses or...
I have some actual misses because
okay, good. Let's talk about that.
I've definitely had situations where, and this actually is in the case where it actually wasn't a series per se, but it's a serialized novel. So it's all one novel, but again, it's the same issue where every 3 months I come back to it and there's a new installment and I have to reacquaint myself. And, where all of a sudden I'm, however much of it, and I go, oh, is this how they're talking about this part of the castle? And then it not being clear, not being made clear. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to, sift through all these other earlier drafts. I've definitely had situations like that. And I will say, I mean, actually, Crystal, when I edited your last story, I had a question in my head about the protagonist who had been a secondary character in your first story. And I was thinking, wait, is this actually what happened in the first story? And I couldn't remember. And then I looked there in the margin of Scrivener and I just clicked on it and it said, this is what happened to this person in book 1. And I could just look at it. It was fantastic. I didn't have to go and search out that earlier story.
Right. Yeah. So that would be a pro tip I would have for anybody. If you are referencing something where you know a character is recurring, often what I will do is actually take, like the one I'm working on right now, there was a scene from the first book in the series between Jenna and Eli, her brother, and I needed to know exactly what they said to each other. And I knew that Reindeer Games was going to be Eli's story. And so what I did when I was starting that new Scrivener document was actually copy and paste everywhere he appeared, just the little snippets of scenes from Silver Bells, and I actually pasted them right into those Scrivener sections so that, yeah, Amanda didn't have to go find it in that book. It was just right there. And that's something that for me is also very helpful when I'm writing, because I don't want to come out of the story world to go and find stuff either at that point. It's really helpful to have that. And storing some overall organizational documents where you have it all in one place. So I have a character spreadsheet that is all of the named characters I've ever put in any River's End book, so that if, you know, so-and-so's neighbor was called this, I don't also have so-and-so's neighbor called that if the other person lives across town. I only want each name to occur once. And that way, if I'm coming up with a name I think is original because I've forgotten I used it, then I have some way of knowing, no, that person's already in there. And there's lots of tools that do similar things for that. So we'll dive more into that after. But yeah, just really good to keep in mind that a little bit of front-loaded organization will save you a ton of stress and heartache in the editing phase, and will also save your editor a ton of stress.
That's right. I mean, really, your editors, sorry to interrupt, your editor's needs are also your needs. So whatever you would use to organize things for yourself, those are also the things your editor's going to use.
Absolutely. And so what about stuff that occurs off screen? Now, you know, as you said, there are time gaps. So maybe things that weren't written into another book. How would you handle that? Just out of curiosity, do you have any recommendations of how to like include information that wasn't necessarily in another book?
That's a
like backstory or
right.
Or missing time. Like, let's say there's 3 books that are in a series and there's a missing piece of time between book 1 and book 2, but events are going to refer back to it. Any sort of suggestions about how to track that?
Well, I mean, I would say, avoid the info dump, but chances are, if you've skipped a certain amount of time between 2 books, you can probably sum up what's happened, the key things that have happened between those gaps without too much fuss or bother. But I would just say to do it early and to make it as simple and concise as possible so that the reader can simply absorb that and move on. I don't think, you know.
I see. And I'm not talking about the reader. I mean for the writer. Like, would you just say another Scrivener tab or a separate document that says these are events that happened in the in-between scenes that don't actually make it to the page?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, it's really just a matter of having these tabs, you know, have a tab for that, you know, have a tab for this. Make it consistent between every book. Then the editor knows where to look every single time. And the editor can then make sure that you've included enough of that in the story to make it clear. I always say that when I'm editing something, I like to not have a whole lot of information about it before I start, because I want to approach it as a reader. Then I can see where those gaps are. If I know too much about everybody in advance, I might miss some of those necessary, those gaps that need to be filled. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So for a recommendation, not like filling the margin of your Word doc with comments about what the details are. Like, don't go and find them and paste them right into those margins, because you need to read it with a fresh set of eyes, but having it somewhere accessible that's slightly outside of the story itself is a good practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially because oftentimes if you're using Scrivener or something and you're putting comments in the margin, once I start doing my comments, some of your comments might be totally invisible to me anyway. So I wouldn't even see them.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. You have that Bible, it's part of the Bible, it's on the side. And then if I have any questions, I'm always going to the same place.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And I'm excited to see what all strategies other people are using to put together their tracking stuff and build out their worlds. And so hopefully we'll get some sharing of that going on. But thanks, Amanda, so much for your time today. And if anybody does have more questions, where should they find you?
Well, I am part of the Creative Academy, so I'm not always on there talking all the time, but I do read everyone's comments when they come to my email. So really, even if you just have a random editorial question about something strange or small, I love answering those questions. Sometimes they make me do a little research too, and I really like that. You can also, I mean, I have a website, amandabidnall.com, so pretty easy to remember. And yeah, if you have any, you can also contact me there. No problem.
All right, perfect. So GLIP community, if you have a quick little question, if you're looking for editing, Amanda is potentially available for inquiries. So just contact her through her website or in the GLIP forums and we will get you connected. So thanks so much. And everybody, back to your writing. Have
Thanks
a
for
good day. Bye.
Thank you for being a part of this Creative Academy event. If you're not a member yet, join us today and unlock a wealth of resources, masterclasses, feedback opportunities, and online community events designed to help you reach the next step in your writing journey. No matter what stage you're at, we've got a helping hand to guide you along the way. Check out our free resource room if you'd like to get a taste of how we can help you reach your writing and publishing goals. Thank you for bringing us along on your writing and publishing journey, and Donna, Eileen, and I hope we'll see you around the Creative Academy soon.